The invitation looked ordinary at first. Thick cream paper, elegant gold letters, the kind that promised luxury, laughter, and powerful people under one roof. It was sent from the CEO's wife herself, a woman known in the city for her flawless image, her charity events, and her carefully controlled smile. But behind that smile was something sharper, something colder. When she casually mentioned inviting the black maid to the party, everyone assumed it was a strange act of kindness. No one realized it was meant to be a joke. A quiet one, a cruel one. The maid's name was Grace. She had worked in the CEO's house for years, arriving before sunrise, leaving long after dark. She spoke softly, kept her head down, and did her job with care. Most people barely noticed her, except when they needed something cleaned or carried away. To the CEO's wife, Grace was invisible, and that invisibility made her an easy target. The invitation was never about inclusion. It was about amusement, about watching how someone like her would react in a room full of silk dresses, expensive suits, and judgmental eyes. Word spread quickly among the guests. Whispers followed. Some laughed it off. Some felt uncomfortable but said nothing. A few even came expecting entertainment, curious to see how the maid would behave at such a high-profile event. The CEO himself didn't question it. He was too busy, too distant, assuming his wife knew what she was doing. After all, this was her world. Status, appearances, power. The night of the party arrived, glowing with chandeliers and soft music. Glasses clinked, conversations floated, and smiles were worn like masks. The CEO's wife stood at the center of it all, confident, composed, waiting for the moment her joke would arrive. She imagined awkward greetings, nervous glances, maybe even laughter behind hands. It felt harmless to her. It felt deserved. Then the doors opened. At first, no one spoke. Conversation slowed, then stopped completely. Heads turned. Eyes widened. The room changed in a single breath. The woman who stepped inside did not look like the version of Grace everyone thought they knew. She walked in calmly, her posture steady, her expression unreadable. There was something about her presence, quiet but commanding, that made even the loudest voices fall silent. The CEO's wife felt her smile stiffen. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. This wasn't funny. This wasn't comfortable. Guests exchanged looks, confusion mixing with curiosity. Some sensed that they were witnessing something important, though no one could explain why. Grace met the CEO's wife's eyes for just a second. In that brief moment, there was no anger, no fear, only certainty. And as she took another step forward, the question hung heavy in the air, unspoken but impossible to ignore. Who was Grace really, and what had they all just underestimated? For years, Grace had lived between moments. She moved quietly through hallways where decisions were made, secrets were whispered, and power shifted hands without her name ever being spoken. In the CEO's home, she learned to listen without seeming to hear, to observe without being seen. She noticed how people spoke differently when they thought no one important was around. She learned how respect was often tied to titles, not character. And she learned how easily kindness could turn into something else when wrapped in pride. The CEO's wife had always treated her politely, but never warmly. There was a distance that felt deliberate, a reminder of who belonged where. Grace accepted it without complaint. She had her reasons. This job paid the bills. It kept her close to something unfinished, something from her past that still mattered. Every day she told herself to be patient, to wait. As Grace stood inside the party, the weight of hundreds of eyes pressing against her skin, memories surfaced uninvited. The early mornings when she first arrived in the city with nothing but a small suitcase. The interviews where her name was overlooked, her education questioned, her confidence mistaken for attitude. The choices she made to survive, to stay quiet, to start again from the bottom. No one here knew that story. They only saw what they expected to see. The guests shifted uneasily, unsure how to respond. Some offered polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Others looked away, suddenly interested in their drinks. A few watched closely, sensing there was more to this moment than an awkward invitation. The air felt tight, like the seconds before a storm breaks. The CEO finally noticed the silence. He turned, confusion crossing his face as he took in the scene. His gaze moved from the guest to Grace, then to his wife. Something about the look on her face made him pause. This wasn't part of a carefully planned evening. This felt unexpected, uncontrolled. Grace walked further into the room, her steps slow but steady. Each step felt intentional, as if she were crossing a line she had been preparing for longer than anyone realized. The soft music played on, strangely out of place now. The party, once loud and confident, had become a room full of questions. People began to whisper again, but this time the tone had changed. It wasn't mocking. It wasn't amused. It was curious. Who was she? Why did she seem so calm? Why didn't she look embarrassed or lost? Why did she look like someone who knew exactly where she was meant to be? The CEO's wife tried to regain control, forcing a laugh that sounded thin even to her own ears. She gestured vaguely, as if to turn the moment into something small, something forgettable. But it was too late. The attention had shifted. The power in the room no longer felt one-sided. Grace stopped near the center, her eyes scanning the faces around her. She recognized some of them. People she had served coffee to. People who never remember her name. People whose lives were shaped by decisions made behind closed doors she cleaned after hours. Her phone vibrated softly in her bag. A reminder, a signal that the night was moving exactly as it should. Grace lifted her gaze, calm and unshaken, and the room seemed to lean in without realizing it. Whatever she had come here to do, whatever truth she carried with her, it was clear this party was no longer just a joke. And as the CEO watched her closely, a growing sense of unease settled in his chest. Because something told him this was only the beginning. The CEO watched Grace more closely now. Tribe placed a feeling growing in his chest. It wasn't anger or embarrassment. It was recognition without memory, like seeing a familiar shadow, without knowing where it came from. He had built his company on instincts, on reading rooms and people, and something about this moment felt misaligned. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an accident. Grace hadn't walked in like someone out of place. She had walked in like someone arriving exactly on time. Across the room, the CEO's wife felt her control slipping. She had planned this evening carefully. Every guest, every seat, every smile. The invitation to the Maid was meant to remind everyone, especially Grace, of the line between power and service. But now that line felt blurred. The laughter she expected never came. Instead, people were watching her, not Grace, measuring her reaction, waiting to see how she would handle what she could no longer shape. Grace felt the shift too. She had known it would happen the moment she accepted the invitation. Still, standing there brought a quiet weight. She thought of her mother's words long ago, about dignity being something no one could give or take unless you allowed it. Grace had held on to that lesson through years of being overlooked. Tonight, she wasn't here to demand respect. She was here to stop hiding from it. A familiar face near the back of the room caught her eye, a senior executive from the company. Their eyes met briefly, and his expression changed. Surprise flickered there, followed by doubt. He knew her from somewhere else. She could see it. That small reaction confirmed something Grace had suspected for a long time. Pieces were connecting, even if no one understood the picture yet. The whispers grew sharper now, quieter but more intense. Some guests began pulling out their phones, not to record, but to message. Rumors spread faster than truth ever could. Was this some kind of statement? A publicity move? A setup? No one had answers, and that uncertainty made people uneasy. High-profile events thrived on predictability. Tonight had none. The CEO stepped forward slightly, as if to speak, then stopped. He glanced again at his wife, whose expression was tight, almost offensive. In that moment, he realized she hadn't told him everything. Maybe she never did. Their marriage, polished on the outside, had long relied on silence to survive. This silence felt heavier than most. Grace adjusted the strap of her bag, feeling the phone inside, still warm from a vibration earlier. Someone was waiting. Not here, but close. A subplot unfolding quietly alongside the party, unknown to the guests sipping expensive drinks. Grace wasn't alone in this, even as she appeared to be. A young woman from the catering staff caught Grace's eye and offered a small, encouraging nod. It was barely noticeable, but it mattered. It reminded Grace that power didn't always sit at the head of the table. Sometimes it stood quietly at the edges, watching, remembering. The CEO's wife finally spoke again, her voice overly bright, trying to steer the evening back on course. But the words floated without landing. The room no longer belonged to her. It belonged to the unanswered questions, to the tension stretching thin between appearances and truth. Grace took a slow breath, steadying herself. She hadn't said a word yet, but everything was already changing. The invitation meant to mock her had done the opposite. It had placed her at the center of a story no one expected to hear. And as the CEO looked at her, a troubling thought settled in his mind. Whatever Grace was here for, it wasn't small. And once it began, there would be no easy way to stop it. The room felt smaller with every passing second, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. Grace sensed it in the way people shifted their weight, in the way conversations died the moment she moved. The CEO's wife stood near her, smiling too hard, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape that didn't exist. This was no longer her stage. The spotlight had moved, and it refused to move back. The CEO cleared his throat, finally breaking the silence. His voice carried authority, but beneath it was uncertainty. He welcomed everyone again, thanked them for coming, tried to remind the room of why they were there. But even he could feel it. No one was listening anymore. Every guest's attention kept sliding back to Grace, to the unanswered questions she carried without speaking. Grace felt her phone vibrate again. This time, she didn't ignore it. The message was short, simple, 5 minutes. Her heartbeat quickened, but her face remained calm. She had waited years for this moment. 5 minutes felt both terrifying and inevitable. Across the room, the senior executive who had recognized her earlier leaned toward another guest and whispered something urgent. That guest's expression changed instantly. Eyes widened, heads turned. Whatever name had just been spoken carried weight. It wasn't a rumor anymore. It was a possibility, and possibilities were dangerous in rooms full of powerful people. The CEO's wife noticed a shift and felt a chill crawl up her spine. She had planned to humiliate a maid, not to feel expose herself. For the first time, doubt crept in. She wondered if she had made a mistake inviting Grace. A mistake that could cost more than pride. Grace took another step forward, closer to the CEO now. Not confrontational, not dramatic, just close enough to be seen clearly. He met her gaze, searching her face for answers. Something in her eyes told him she wasn't here for attention or revenge. She was here for truth, and truth had a way of unsettling even the strongest foundations. Memories stirred in his mind. An old deal, a rushed signature, a name he hadn't thought about in years. He couldn't place it yet, but the discomfort was real. The company he built prided itself on transparency, on ethics. At least, that was the story they told publicly. Around them, guests pretended to sip drinks, but their hands trembled slightly. Phones buzzed quietly. Messages flew. A few people considered leaving, sensing the night was about to turn into something they didn't want to be associated with. Others stayed, drawn by the promise of witnessing something rare. Power being questioned. Grace inhaled slowly, grounding herself. She thought of the long nights, the sacrifices, the silence she had carried like armor. All of it had led here. The Joe that was meant to shrink her had done the opposite. It had placed her in front of everyone who needed to see her. The CEO's wife opened her mouth to speak again, but no sound came out. For the first time, she had no words ready, no script, no control. Grace glanced once more at her phone, then looked up at the room, at the faces waiting, watching, holding their breath without realizing it. The air felt electric now, tight with expectation. Whatever she was about to say, whatever she was about to reveal, would change more than just this party. And as the clock edged closer to those final 5 minutes, one thing was certain. There was no turning back. Grace felt the shift before anyone said a word. The doors at the far end of the hall opened quietly, almost politely, but the presence that entered carried weight. A man in a dark suit stepped inside, scanning the room with calm, practiced eyes. He wasn't dressed like a guest. He wasn't staff either. A few people recognized him instantly, and the reaction spread like a ripple through water. This wasn't part of the party. The CEO noticed him too, his jaw tightening. He knew that face. He had seen it across boardroom tables, in meetings where every word was measured and every document mattered. The man didn't approach the center of the room. He stopped near the wall, waiting, as if following a timeline only he understood. Grace's phone vibrated once more. A single word appeared on the screen. Now. The senior executive near the back looked pale. He excused himself from the group he was standing with and moved toward the exit, but the man in the dark suit met his eyes and gave a slight shake of his head. Not aggressive, just firm. The executive stopped walking. The CEO's wife sensed something was deeply wrong now. This was no longer about social status or a cruel joke. This was something bigger, something dangerous. Her heart pounded as she looked from Grace to the unfamiliar man, then to her husband, whose face had gone still in a way she had never seen before. Grace finally spoke, her voice steady but clear enough to cut through the tension. She didn't raise it. She didn't need to. The room leaned in instinctively. She thanked the host for the invitation, her words polite, controlled. Then she said something that made the air feel heavier, that she hadn't come alone. The man in the dark suit took a step forward. He introduced himself simply, without drama. A legal representative. Independent. Neutral. The word alone sent another wave through the guests. Legal presence at a private event was never accidental. The CEO felt a cold realization settle in his chest. This wasn't a confrontation meant for emotion. This was preparation. Structure. Evidence. He glanced at Grace again, truly seeing her for first time, not as an employee, not as a guest, but as someone who had planned every detail. Around them, whispers turned into urgent murmurs. Some guests checked their phones again, scanning headlines that hadn't been written yet. Others watched Grace with a mix of admiration and fear. Whatever was coming, it wasn't going to stay within these walls. Grace continued calmly, explaining that sometimes the truth waited for the right moment, the right audience. And tonight, everyone who needed to witness it was already here. Her eyes briefly met the CEO's wife's, not with anger, but with something more unsettling, clarity. The CEO's wife felt exposed, like the room could suddenly see through her perfectly styled appearance. She had wanted to embarrass a maid. Instead, she had invited scrutiny into her own home. The man in the dark suit opened a slim folder, though he didn't reveal its contents. Not yet. The gesture alone was enough. The stakes had changed. This was no longer just about reputation. It was about consequences. Grace took a small step back, letting the silence stretch. She wasn't rushing this. She didn't need to. The tension was doing the work for her. As the CEO stood frozen, surrounded by powerful people who suddenly looked uncertain, one thought echoed through his mind. Whatever Grace was about to uncover had been buried for a reason. And in that moment, everyone understood something was coming that would be impossible to ignore. The silence finally broke when Grace nodded once, giving the signal she'd been holding back all night. The man in the dark suit stepped forward and placed the folder on the table nearest the CEO. He didn't open it right away. He didn't need to. The weight of it was enough. The CEO felt every eye turn toward him, waiting, judging, expecting denial or defense. Instead, he remained still, his face tightening as memories rushed back with sudden clarity. Grace spoke again, calmly explaining what no one in the room had imagined. Years ago, before the company became a global name, before the awards and magazine covers, there had been a quiet partnership, an idea developed by someone whose name never appeared on the final documents. Someone pushed out when success seemed guaranteed. That someone was her mother, a woman whose work laid the foundation for the very systems that now made the company millions. The CEO swallowed hard. He remembered now. The rushed contracts, the pressure, the decision, he told himself, was just business. Grace hadn't been hired as a maid by coincidence. She had come to observe, to confirm, to gather proof that the story she grew up hearing wasn't just pain shaped by memory. And tonight, in a room full of witnesses, she was no longer silent. The legal representative finally opened the folder, outlining the evidence with precision, documents, timestamps, correspondence. Nothing dramatic, just facts. The kind that couldn't be laughed away or ignored. The senior executive who had tried to leave earlier lowered his head, knowing his role had been noted too. The room felt unsteady, as if the ground beneath all that wealth had cracked. The CEO's wife stood frozen, her expression hollow. The joke she planned had turned into a mirror, reflecting a truth she never wanted exposed. She looked at Grace, not knowing what to say, realizing too late that cruelty often underestimates the quiet strength of others. The CEO finally spoke, his voice low, stripped of confidence. He acknowledged the past, not out of pride, but because denial no longer had power. He apologized, not publicly rehearsed words, but something raw and uncomfortable. It didn't fix everything. It couldn't, but it mattered. Just as the tension began to ease, Grace surprised everyone one last time. She revealed that she hadn't come to take the company down. The legal action wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition, correction, and ensuring the truth was recorded where it belonged. She didn't want the spotlight. She wanted closure. Then came the final twist. Grace explained that she would be leaving the case in the hands of an independent board, not for settlement, but for reform. And she wouldn't be staying either. The job, the silence, the waiting, it was over. She had already accepted a position elsewhere, leading a new initiative built on transparency and fairness, one inspired by her mother's unfinished work. The room exhaled, unsure whether to feel relief or awe. As guests slowly began to process what they had witnessed, Grace turned toward the exit. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The party meant to mock her had become the moment that restored her name. And long after she left, the people in that room would remember one thing clearly. Power isn't always loud, and dignity doesn't need permission to stand tall. The party didn't end with music or laughter. It ended quietly, in pieces. Guests left in small groups, voices low, expressions thoughtful. What was meant to be a glamorous social event had turned into something far more real. Outside, the city lights still shone, unaware that inside those walls, a story of power, truth, and long-delayed justice had finally been told. The CEO remained seated long after most people were gone. The success he had built now felt heavier, shaped by choices he could no longer excuse as just business. In the days that followed, he did what he should have done years ago. He worked with the independent board, corrected the records, and made public acknowledgments that couldn't be erased or softened. It didn't rewrite the past, but it changed the future. His company began a slow but necessary transformation, one rooted in accountability and transparency. The CEO's wife faced her own reckoning. The moment that was meant to humiliate someone else had exposed parts of herself she had ignored for too long. She withdrew from the social scene for a while, stepping away from carefully curated appearances. Those close to her noticed a change. Less polish, more silence. It wasn't redemption, but it was reflection. For Grace, the morning after felt lighter. She packed her small apartment with a sense of closure she hadn't known before. The years of working quietly, of being underestimated, had finally reached their purpose. She didn't feel angry anymore. She felt free. Her mother's name was now where it belonged, no longer hidden behind legal language or forgotten files. Grace stepped into her new role with clarity and confidence. The initiative she led focused on ethical leadership, fair recognition, and protecting voices often pushed aside. She spoke openly about her journey, not as a victim, but as someone who understood the cost of silence. People listened, not because of drama, but because of truth. Her story became a reminder that dignity doesn't need permission, and justice doesn't always arrive loudly. The senior executive who once tried to leave the party resigned quietly weeks later. No headlines followed, just a line in a report that few noticed. But those who mattered understood. Consequences didn't always come with applause. As time passed, the story of that night circulated in hushed conversations and online discussions. Some called it unexpected. Others called it overdue. But most agreed on one thing. It changed how they looked at power, at people, at the assumptions made based on appearance or position. Grace never returned to the CEO's home. She didn't need to. That chapter had closed. But the lesson remained. Kindness without respect is not kindness. And underestimating someone because of their role can be the greatest mistake of all. On a quiet evening months later, Grace stood by her window, watching the city settle into night. She thought of her mother, of the path that led her here, and of the strength found in patience and purpose. The past no longer held her. The joke that was meant to break her had done the opposite. It revealed the truth, shifted power, and reminded everyone who witnessed it that sometimes the most powerful voice in a room is the one that waits until the right moment to speak.